The point is, we should go back to the account manager and say, here's all the things that the customer said, and here's some of the things that we're going to do. So now they're getting assistance for their customer. The customer's hopefully happier. Maybe we're uncovering things that they didn't know or validating things that they thought. So I think it's a slow burn, but that's really, that was our strategy.
All right, we are live. What's happening, everyone? So welcome to another episode of It All Depends podcast, the show where we share tactical and actionable insights for customer success managers. So I'm your host, Crush, and I'm stoked to have you joining us today. So my guest today is a really cool individual and a great Sam. She's full of energy, who has made a significant impact in CS. She's actively part of various CS communities and groups and doing great things at Nasdaq. And she's also lived and worked in UK, France, and across LATAM, I believe. Yeah, so it's really cool. So thank you so much for being here on the show. Cinthia, it's so good to have you. How are you doing?
Thanks so much for inviting me. You know, I like to geek out on all things CS. So this is my jam. So thanks for including me.
Awesome. It's so good to have you. And please ignore my tide phase. I'm just coming off a true escalation in my book of business. So yeah, it's just
back escalation. That's a tough one. That's a tough day for anybody.
it's been a rough day, but I'm super excited to start a conversation to glean everything I can from you. And I'm sure the listeners are gonna learn a lot. As the format goes with these episodes, I really want to set up the foundation. And like the podcast really says, it all depends. So I want to set up the foundation first and would love to get to know from you, Cinthia, briefly about the company, about the industry, Nasdaq. When you hear Nasdaq and you're like, okay, Cinthia is the CSM there, is so interesting. You'd want to know like how that works and like how the process is internally. So would love to know how that's been set up.
Yeah, no, of course, you're absolutely right. It's so funny because when people think of Nasdaq, they don't immediately think SaaS solutions, right? But really, our solution does follow the subscription model. And so I'm a CSM for our financial markets technology division. So we essentially help financial firms identify suspicious trading activity so that they can address it, ensure that they're compliant with regulators. And ultimately, what they're looking to do is just be compliant and protect their brand. That's it. No one wants to have some scandal about some crazy trading activity. And that's ultimately what we do. And I was super lucky because I was hired as part of the team to help launch the CSM program almost 2 years ago. So it's been a fantastic journey. Best you can imagine, it's been bumpy like this. So that's really how I got involved. And I don't know what else you want to know, but I'm happy to dive in. I don't know if that's interesting to anybody other than me.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. Yeah, I would love to know more about the setup. Are you involved in onboarding? Do you go through the contract and renewal conversation? How is that set up internally?
So basically, our products, it's complex. So we act more as like subject matter experts. And at this stage, we aren't tied directly to revenue. Who knows what the future will bring? Because as I said, like the CSM program's less than 2 years old. Who knows? I'm always prepared for change. But basically, because our solution is so complex, we don't onboard clients in the traditional sense. So but we do consider ourselves that central spoke that connects clients to our internal partners and ensure that the feedback loop is being closed. So we're later in the stage. We have essentially an implementation team that comes in to check the client's data, ensure that it can go through our algorithm and ultimately produce the result that they need. And this goes on a daily basis. So implementation, depending on how many markets they subscribe to, can take a little bit of chunk of time, and then they ultimately come to us.
Oh, interesting. And what about the contract and renewal piece?
Yeah. So basically, again, because we're not directly tied to revenue, we work closely with their account managers, and that's key, right? And I think that's one of the things that is key in any company, right? You really want to establish those internal partnerships. So right now the account managers are responsible for retention, which would be renewals, and then obviously any sort of expansion opportunities. But as anyone who touches the customer really should be having meaningful conversations. And obviously, if it's like following up on something, you don't necessarily going to dig in. But when you have that opportunity to talk to a customer, you want to understand, are things working the way they should? What's happening in your business? What's changing? And when those sort of things uncover maybe opportunities, or good or bad, right? We want to communicate that with the account managers, but they ultimately are the ones that would do the renewals or upsells, cross sells.
That's so interesting. It's a very unique setup considering, again, like the product is very unique. when you compare it to the typical tech companies. So yeah, very unique, very interesting. Like where account executives are actually responsible for the renewal. So yeah, that's really interesting to hear. I'm not sure how much you can share this, Cynthia, but what does like an average contract duration look like?
And that's actually a good question because typically, because again, like our product is so complex that typically people that want to work with us, there's so much work like on the kind of data gathering side on the front end. And then again, the implementation to get them set up. Typically people that want to go with us, they'll do contracts for several years because they're like, listen, we've committed. We know that you deliver the value. Luckily for us, our solution is the leader in the space. And so we've been around for, 20 years. So there is that kind of compensation. We're not new in this area. But it can be anywhere from 1 to 3 years, right? Because clients' businesses change and maybe they're getting out of certain markets or they might be getting like merging, as we know that happens a lot in finance as well. So maybe they'll just do 1 year renewals or things of that sort. But it's typically several years.
Got it. Got it. And since you mentioned like you joined, I believe 2 years ago, it's been 2 years since you joined the team.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And how big has the team grown so far now?
Yeah, like when I joined, it was me and one other person. So now we're up to 5 people and we're going to continue to grow because our customer base is global and but we're trying to do it thoughtfully because you know what it's like you want to make sure everybody's on the same page. You don't want to overwhelm somebody. And then also to bringing new people into the team because again, the complexity of the product, you want to give them time if you're meant to be a subject matter expert, you just need to get your head around the product. So we want to do it in a thoughtful way.
Yeah, no, totally makes sense. And within those 5 teams, like how does the book of business, like what's the size of the book of business?
It depends because basically we work specifically with financial entities, anybody who's trading. And so that can look different. So we've got, let's say energy companies, right? Who trade in specific markets that are energy specific, right up to like global investment firms. So basically like the book of business can vary. And that's what we're looking at right now because we have a mix of the CSMs covering some of the biggest customers and then the in between. So really the book of business itself, we can have, again, depending on what your mix is, because there's a couple of our CSMs that are strictly focused on a couple of the biggest customers. And because they're so big, they're full enterprise. So you really need to multi-thread the work that's involved in that. So they're going to have maybe a few customers where anyone who's handling kind of the mid or lower tier customers is going to have, let's say, up to 50 customers.
No, totally makes sense. Yeah. It's a similar setup on my side at HubSpot as well. You have it's actually segregated based on the MRR for us. So it's like lower MRR is mostly the scaled CST team that actually looks after it. And then you have the small mid businesses. And then you have the mid-market corp strategic accounts. And then accordingly, you actually have the book of businesses actually assigned to. So yeah, totally can relate to that.
It makes sense, right? Because they're all going to have different journeys, right? And they're going to want to be encountered. You have to meet the customer where they're at and also make sense from a business perspective as well, right?
Yeah, no, totally. And the call cadence. So what does the call cadence look like for your book of business?
I would say that's such a great question because what's the right mix? So for me, at this stage, I would say it's like basically bi-weekly. And I'm trying to the biggest challenge. You never want to check in. No one wants to be checked in on. So it's just trying to find those value adds, right? So like any sort of insights you can bring. And then also too, when you segment them out, a value add to an energy customer is going to be different than a value add to a global investment, right? And that's not going to be the same. So I think that we work closely with the marketing team to try to understand what are we doing? What sort of materials or content we're releasing that we can share and highlight. And again, I'm not that person that dumps a white paper on someone. Hey, here, you might read this. No, I'll be like, hey, listen, look at page, highlight a section and email and say, hey, this is a white paper that we did. This is a section that might be interesting. If it's interesting, I'll send you the whole thing, right? You need to be strategic because when you get a white paper, don't you just immediately want to go to sleep? I don't want to read a 100-page document. Tell me the part that is important to me. But anyway, that's for me to get that to be strategic in terms of value adds at this stage. But again, depending on the customer, it could be a little more.
Yeah, I love the call out that you made of being relevant, not sending the whole white paper, but just like sending those specific relevant details that make sense for the customer. And it's great, like cross-functionally, you actually connect and sync up with the marketing team and then get those resources and details and then share with the customers. Yeah, I've seen is all the automated emails just going out to customers, and those are the worst. And we're actually, in a way, teaching the customers to ignore us in a way. And then when we do have some relevant resources, they're just like, oh, that's going to be another general unrelated resource, and they're going to basically ignore us. So it's so important.
Oh, totally agree. So 100%, because they're like, it's white noise. It's out. They just tuned it out. We all do it. And we're just like, oh, that's a sales pitch or that's a this. And then you don't even bother opening it. But you're right. If you consistently deliver personalized as much as we can do, you know what I mean? Because to some extent, it's personalization at scale, which I know is an oxymoron, but you do have to try to figure out how to do that, how to walk that line.
Yeah. And the last one on setting the stage up is we can't not talk about the metrics. So what are the metrics? That you are assessed on?
Yeah, that's a great question, because you're right. Because again, that's also, and for us, we're like a new team, and you know how tough it is sometimes to like define customer success. People think it's customer service. They don't really know what you do. You do need to demonstrate the value. And I think you're right. The metrics is where you go. And for us, like our two main focuses right now is on retention, like preventing churn. Let's try to look at through the customer health index, which we know also too is so tricky. Because what are the right metrics we should be looking at, right? Like part of it's our own sentiment based on conversations, part of it's used, all those sort of things. But retention is a big deal, because we want to not only keep our customers like most everybody does, but we also want to look at opportunities to strategically grow. And that's the second half. Because again, even though we're not directly tied to revenue, the ways that we can, if we can uncover opportunities and share that with our account managers who will ultimately have those kind of conversations on contracting, the better. And also too, even better if we can partner, right? Like a lot of times, and that takes time, even with your internal partners, to develop those scenarios. But those are the two main things that we feel, you know what it's like, if you can tie yourself to revenue, even in an indirect way, that's where you demonstrate the value internally. And if you have strategic conversations with the customer and they're telling you the ways that they're looking to expand their business and to grow thoughtfully, and you can, strategically bring them the right ideas and solutions, they're going to love you for it, as opposed to just, hey, just buy this. Yeah, that's really not what we're meant to do.
Yeah. So is the expansion and growth opportunity, do you have to log an SQL that goes to the account executive? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like right now, it's not formalized, but I see it going there at some point, because I do think, just like any other, the MQLs, that's how marketing kind of defines like what their output is. And then it turns into an SQL for the salespeople, et cetera. But it's not formalized at this stage. But eventually there could be like a CSQL, right? If we really wanted to look at it. That gets tricky too, because the minute customer success is really tied to like a quota on it, it starts to get a little murky in terms of the types of conversations you're having and the trust level with your customers. Again, that fine line we all walk.
Understood. Perfect. No, that was really good context for us to know, so we can dive into the tactics and the habits that you've developed in the past 2 years in Nasdaq and even before that. So we'd love to dive deep into those things, Cinthia, if you don't mind. I'm a big believer on the Pareto's principle, the 20% input that results in the 80% output. And we have so many things, like you said, we have so many things going on, also different sides of the book. So you have to juggle and manage a lot of things. So what do you think is your 20%, like the priority that you've set? Like, this is the priority that I'm going to focus on, which is going to result in the majority of the outcomes.
Yeah, that's such a good question, because how much time do we waste working on nonsense, especially projects you don't want to do? So in terms of what has the best results, honestly, especially given that we're a new team and we're trying to justify the value internally and then to, provide value to our external customers, I'm going to tell you, it's collaboration across teams. I really do focus on that a lot, because first of all, I despise silos. I can't stand it. I've worked at big companies. I've worked at small companies, and silos exist everywhere you go. And it's not ideal, right? And it's not intentional most of the time. It's just people are in their own worlds, and they stay in their lane. But I think that when you are much more thoughtful and intentional about understanding, first of all, what others do, and because I've been on the sales side, I understand the full cycle sales and have worked with marketing before, although marketing and sales love to fight with each other. Never understood that. But that's another podcast. But my point is, and I was alluding to earlier, is aligning with marketing on their projects. That's one of the first things I did was, who's our product manager? And then when I found that person, I was just like, I just want to say, hey, we're launching this team. One of the things we want to do is to provide content for our users, because our product is so complex. We wanted to say, hey, how can we do like bite-sized content. We wanted to do some training videos that were short videos. We wanted to put that out on our knowledge base. We wanted to have just like enhanced content to break down some of the aspects of our solution that I think that our customers have told us that they struggle with. And guess what? Surprise, marketing wants to do the same thing. And they have budget and they have tools and we have tools. And that's how you share. And guess what? When you do that, it's a win. Everybody, well, I'm happy to share, do a joint win. I'm happy to do that. And isn't it much quicker when you don't have to do it all yourself, right? And you've got that extra set of eyes. So that was one of the first things I did. Again, account managers, at the end of the day, they're the ones that are responsible to close those renewals. And so we want to help them. And as I was saying before, I feel like every conversation with the customer, you should be very curious and just be like, and genuinely, obviously do your due diligence, right? You're going to be checking CRM. You're going to be prepared unless you want to really shoot yourself in the foot. But then you want to ask those questions. Hey, we got to this value milestone. What's the next one? What are you thinking of in the business? Even if it has nothing to do with my solution, because that's how you uncover ways that you can look at not only just becoming more of a strategic advisor, which I think is a goal for a lot of CSMs as it should be, but also opportunities to grow that you can share with account managers. And then finally, on the product side, one of the things, and this has been a big win for us, is all the feedback, all those precious little conversations we have with customers that we document so carefully, that all gets lost if we don't share it across teams. And the voice of customer, putting together a reporting on that. And our product team is, you never know, because you never want to tell anybody their baby's ugly, but we're like, hey, here's the good, the bad, and the ugly. And they loved it. Our team absolutely loved it. They were just like, this is fantastic. And now we've agreed to have twice a year meeting to talk about voice of customer, NPS, and the feedback as well. So getting everyone aligned, it demonstrates that value internally. And guess what? It ultimately serves our customers. So to me, collaboration, if I'm thinking about that, even just 20%, all those relationships are going to produce 80% of results. Fingers crossed. But that's my goal.
That is so interesting, Cinthia. This is why I actually figured out there was a gap, because generally, if you would ask a CSM, you would actually assume and expect that, the 20% is like, how they manage their time, how they manage their calendar or the book of business. Yeah. But it really depends. It all depends on what's the industry, like how big is your team, like how's the setup and everything. And then, for example, collab, I didn't even expect that it's going to be the 20%, but it totally makes sense based on the stage and the season that you're at and your team is at. Yeah, that's so interesting. Love it. Yep. Yeah. Awesome. So collab. Yeah. With regards to the collab, in line with that, I'm always interested in talking and knowing from CSMs on best practices on how to work with sales team in specific, the account managers. Mm-hmm. You've actually gone into that briefly, but I would love to dig deep into what are the best practices that you have when working with the sales folks. They have a different set of metrics that they want to achieve, and we have different metrics that we are focusing on. There might be some misalignment here and there. There might be some drama here and there, which we want to avoid, things like that. So I'm just curious, from your side, what are the best practices that you've actually developed throughout these years?
Yeah, that's such a great question, because you're absolutely right. It's like they have, when you're on the sales side, you've got that zero at the start of every month. So they're just really thinking, how can I get my deals closed? And how can I make sure that my customers renew and everyone's happy, the whole thing. And so I think, again, this goes back to really just trying to get alignment. At the end of the day, it really just boils down to alignment. And I think what we've done, and again, because we came in, our team is newer, before we reach out to any of our customers, at this stage now we have relationships with, I think, all of them. But before we were reaching out to any of them, we checked with our account managers and we're just like, hey, we're doing our outreach. One of the customers we're going to outreach is in your book of business. Is there anything that's happening? Because if they're in the middle of a renewal conversation, is that the time to do it? If they're in the middle of an implementation, is that the right time let's align on that? So to give them the heads up, to give them the right of refusal, because if they're in the midst of some sort of conversation, and then also just to be considerate to inform them. And it's been a mixed bag of responses. I'm not going to lie. It's a work in progress. That's how it is. But I think what happened was slowly but surely, just by, again, being smart, having a plan, because again, we're not going to tell our salespeople, we want to check in on these. They're going to be like, get away from my customer. And we're saying, no, our initial conversations, we're going to reach out to this. And who do you think is the best contact we're going to reach out to? XYZ person, and they'll agree, or maybe say someone else might be better, and then say, hey, this is what we're going to come out with. We were originally saying, what's your experience been with the tool? Where's some of the gaps? Where could we be better? And a lot of it had to do with training. A lot of they'd had maybe changes in personnel, because that happens, right? There's turnover. And those are ways where we can add immediate value, either through one-on-one training or the content we have on our knowledge base, yada, yada, yada. The point is, we should go back to the account manager and say, here's all the things that the customer said, and here's some of the things that we're going to do. So now they're getting assistance for their customer. Their customer's hopefully happier. Maybe we're uncovering things that they didn't know, or validating things that they thought. So I think it's a slow burn, but that was our strategy. But starting with, let's not just go in like a bull trying to shove directly to the customer. Let's get everybody on the same page, get alignment, no surprises, and hopefully happier customers in the end.
Yeah. And I'd be interested to know, okay, post sales, would you as a CSM be the main point of contact for the customer? Is that how?
That's a great question. Like I said, we consider ourselves how we present it, because it's such a good question, because people will say, and again, because we're newer, they're like, sir, you my account manager now? Or if I have a question about my password, do I call you? I'm like, and so we would have this graphic, which is like the customer in the center, and then the outer, like in the circle graph, like a pie chart or a donut, they're in the middle, we're around them. And then all of our teams are out: product, marketing, sales, service. And we would say, your account manager is still your account manager, contracting and housekeeping. They're the ones, password resets and shenanigans like that, service desk. If you have questions for marketing, those sort of things. But we could be like that additional layer. So that's what we're trying to figure out, because what it does end up happening is, as I'm sure, when you start working with customers and you start developing those relationships and having those strategic touch points where you're establishing value, they start to come directly to you. You know what I mean? So it's a little tricky.
Okay.
But I think at the end of the day, if it's a win for the customer, it's a win for everybody. And for us, since we're still rolling out the program, we're gonna see how that plays out in the long run.
And when you, for example, let's say you identified a growth opportunity, an expansion with a customer after your call with them, would you then loop in the sales rep? And then like after, I would imagine that you'll have an internal briefing, or you'll probably share the details with them on the growth opportunity, but at the same time, loop the sales rep in the email, and then introduce them. And is that how it would go about?
Yeah, that's exactly
Yeah.
right. I mean, so typically, and again, so the customer feels, because customers can be suspicious, and now, who are you? And am I ever going to see you again? And that sort of thing.
Right.
And during the call, I'm always taking notes. I'm like, hey, I'm sorry, I just want to document this, because after this call, I'm going to send you meeting minutes, so we're on the same page. If I missed anything, you've got the chance to correct it, and then also include next steps, because certain things, and I think you would probably agree, the customer needs to have skin in the game. If they want certain things, if they want trainings on things, then they have to ensure that people show up. They have to provide dates, right? So those are the sort of next steps that we say. We're willing to do it. Let's say a training, like you need to just ensure that you're going to set that time aside and then show up and be attentive, right? That sort of thing. So those are the sort of things. So we'll document what was said, and then the next steps. And then one of those next steps, would you identify an expansion, would be bring in your account manager, and then definitely copy them in on the conversation. And you're absolutely right. There needs to be like a separate conversation to just break it down with that. And they should know their customers. So it shouldn't be like that extensive, but we definitely want to just say, hey, and just to ensure that we didn't talk about any sort of pricing or gave us just like, hey, we went super high level. We're going to hand it over to you very gently to continue from here.
Yeah. I like that you called out the super high level, that because we often fall into the trap where like we start to demoing sometimes does make sense. It's good. It's a good skill to have, but then sometimes you just need to let the sales rep do their job and not take over. It's really a judgment call. Of course, there are exceptions that you can make with the customer and take them through a demo and all that. But yeah, best would be to let them handle it and then make that closed one, right?
To not have any trouble, right? Not to confuse the customer, right? Yeah. It's you now.
All right. The next one is I'm always like super interested on the habits, the specific habits that you developed, Cinthia, throughout the day, like whether it comes to how you take notes when you're on call with customer, or from the very start, like from the beginning, you just don't start your day without a coffee, let's say. Just those little things, from the very big things on the notes, on how you set up your book of business on your portal, how you script the agenda, the call, all those habits. I'm curious to know what are those specific habits that
Yeah,
a couple of
yeah.
habits that you can share with us.
Yes, of course. And first of all, I definitely have to have a coffee first thing of the day. There's just no way around it. I would not function. So correct on that one. But I do think, like for me, a couple things for sure that I do is I have this kind of ongoing Teams chat, like a little chat to myself. It's my to-do list so that I can just, I used to write it down. I used to have a notebook back in the day. Once upon a time, I was on a trading desk and I just had this notebook and I had like my to-dos, who am I going to close? And all these things. But so that's like my reminder, my little chat to myself. But also time blocking is huge for me because I suffer from shiny object syndrome. If I'm working on something else, something over here, and then I get distracted. So if I time block, especially for projects that maybe are a little bit complex or just things that I don't really want to do, like then it's like my appointment with myself. And so it's a huge for me. And it's a great way to take apart big projects. Like during this time, I need to do these 5 steps that these time blocks are what I'm going to do either twice a day or 3 times, whatever it might be. And then for ongoing projects too. And in terms of preparing for customer calls, I think probably any CSM or anybody who's talking with a customer, the first thing you obviously need to do is to check your previous notes, whether they be in Salesforce or HubSpot or anywhere else. You want to see what's been said and see where they stand. And then also obviously look at the usage. So it's all those little housekeeping things, just so you've got it at the tip, at your hands, right in the back pocket, ready to go. But typically with any conversation I have, if it's like a continuation of a conversation, or even if you're doing a QBR or something like that, the first thing I say to the customer is, has anything changed since the last time we spoke? Even if we spoke just 2 weeks ago, because you just don't know. I've gone into calls so many times where I'm just like, okay, Joe, we're going to talk about, and then hang on. We're doing away with this whole division. I'm going to be out of work. What? Like that's extreme. But you know what? Things can change. Like, has anything changed? Is there anything? Oh yeah, actually that we got a new person. I'm going to bring them on to this call. That's who this person is. Those sort of things. But that's literally where I start, because then it's about them. And then continue from there before I talk about any of the things that I'm looking to deliver and things that maybe I promised or maybe they promised.
Okay. I love the time blocking. Yeah. I get distracted very easily, and I don't know. I can't help, but I always keep my Gmail open. There's the tab that's there. And when I see 3 emails, and then I always like, whatever I'm doing in the midst of it, I'll leave that and I'll go check my email. Only recently, just like a few weeks ago, I'll just close that tab and only check it like a few times in a day. So I'm like, I don't get distracted. But yeah, that's a good one. So
It's true.
on the calls, getting on calls with customers, Cynthia, I wanted to get your take on this. Is sometimes customers are just reluctant to get on calls. I'm not sure if you face that in your book. Like sometimes they just don't want to get on calls, and they're pretty self-sufficient in some cases. In some cases, they probably have an impression that they wouldn't get value out of this call in a way for some reason. So like, how do you tackle and approach those scenarios?
Yeah, that is such a tough one, especially these days, because we've been in this remote environment. And I think everybody, even myself, you just get so used to not interacting with others at all. You can do things on your own. That's a really hard one. And I think sometimes you have to you have to meet them where they are. Okay. So you don't really let to get on calls, but then I think that's when the email cadences become important, and then the value that you bring. And I think you just need to stay on top of them. You just need to just say, hey, hopefully you've done a joint success plan or been able to hopefully you've been able to get them to agree to that, to certain value milestones. And when you start to hit that and show that you're delivering it, then you can get them to get more engaged. But you're right. There's certain customers that they will not respond. And it's just you're bringing the fire and they just don't want to join. Right. And so you do have to, I think, just chip away at them. And at some point, I do think some people they want very little contact. It's really tough.
Yeah, no, agreed. Totally. Yeah. All right. My very last question would be, again, like CSMs, we talk about all this strategy and tactics that you implement. It's not sunshine and rainbows every day, CSM's life. So I'm curious to know what are the times that you've actually failed and what was the journey like and what actually came out of it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And really, it's a good one, but it's a tough one. And actually, I'll have to dive into my past experience on the sales side for this. But some of the outcomes I think are universal. When I was still in a sales role and at a company that shall remain nameless, to protect the innocent, but I was part of this business development team. And basically the managing director felt like the account managers at the time weren't necessarily as motivated to go after new business, or they were uncomfortable, whatever it was. So they created this team. And so what I noticed as soon as I joined, that there wasn't a lot of direction and the territories were a little bit skewed. It was very strange. I had some of North America, some of South and Central America. It was a little bit strange how they had it organized, but I ignored the red flags and I said, okay, let's dive in and get a feel for the customer base. And at the same time, being in team meetings, the managing director was just like, hey, I think we should go after this insurance sector. It seems like the previous team didn't make a dent in that. That would be prime for new business. Long story short, I talked to my director and I was just like, what do you think? These are some of the things. Let's talk about marketing. Let's see what materials. And I kept running into roadblocks. A lot of the firms were based out of the UK, which is outside of my territory. So I was just like, wow, what's going on here? And so numerous times I tried to strategize, and my assistant director he didn't have a lot of feedback, suggestions, and he didn't really didn't seem to want to talk about it. And finally, I just threw up my hands at a team meeting. I'm just like, I don't know what to do. I'm making zero traction. This is 2 months of work. And finally, he just said, you know what? The sales director admitted they'd run into that problem before, and it was probably a waste of time to target that sector. So I wanted to tear my hair out. However, I learned 3 things from that. One, don't assume that your leadership knows all the answers. While the managing director was well-meaning, they didn't really have a clue about which sector to target. And I just put my trust in them. And I should have done due diligence and asked harder questions. Also, ask your leaders the hard questions and ensure that they have the clear answers. Because again, the director I got the feeling he was afraid to contradict the managing director and just simply went along with it, and then ultimately sacrificed my time and effort, which was really frustrating because just to avoid that hard conversation. And the third one, do not ignore red flags. At the end of the day, when someone's consistently vague with you, and especially with strategy, that's a red flag. Like, what am I missing here? And if I had dug in, I would have saved myself a lot of time. So I put all those things back on myself because I made assumptions about the leadership. I made assumptions about viability, and I did ignore the red flags. So those 3 things, I think if you take those into your work, you could definitely benefit from my mistakes in that instance.
Yeah, no. Yeah, thanks for being so transparent and sharing that. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I can totally see that being universal, and even we as CSMs can implement that, and anyone else, obviously. But yeah, thanks for sharing that, Cinthia.
Like I said, my pain could be someone else's joy.
Yes, no, totally. Thanks for that. And my very last question I always want to ask my guest is, which CSM would you, Cinthia, like me to have as the next guest in the pod?
Such a good question. There's so many amazing CSMs, but the person who comes to mind, I don't know if you know him, Hamid Al-Kak. He is a brilliant CSM. We had a virtual coffee a few months ago, and he has this framework for communication cadences that I'm still digesting and looking to implement. So smart, loves to geek out on CS, many clever ideas and a fantastic perspective. So I would give him my seal of approval. And I think you'll like
Awesome. Yeah, I did. I actually did have a chat with him a couple of months ago. So yeah, great. Yeah. Awesome. That is the end. We're just wrapping our discussion. But is there anything else, Cinthia, you would like to share with our listeners? Perhaps how they can reach out to you, any upcoming projects or initiatives that they should keep a lookout for?
Yeah, honestly, I love reading your posts on LinkedIn, and I love to post too about all things customer success and relationship management. So you can look at my post there. And I'm currently working on an article with Ashna Patel for CS Insider on like how to leverage sales tactics post sales, because we know that kind of relationship aspect, and also hopefully not being afraid, those kind of revenue conversations with customers can really make you a much, much better CSM. So I'm looking forward to that. And that'll be coming out in the next few months. So looking forward.
Oh, that's so interesting. I'll make sure to include that in my call notes so people can actually refer to that. But yeah, thanks so much. I really want to express my gratitude to you, Cinthia, for being here, joining us today and sharing your incredible insights. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you. I love the energy that you bring. It's so great to have someone bring that energy. You just feed off that energy and you get energized in a way. So I love that, but really appreciate you joining us. So thank you for coming in.
And thanks to you, because I love your content and I love these sort of conversations.
Appreciate it.
So the pleasure was all mine. I look forward to our next virtual chat in the future off a podcast.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Cynthia. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode of It All Depends Pod. We hope you enjoyed the discussion with Cynthia. I'm sure I did, but don't forget to subscribe and follow us on the podcast platform, and be sure to join the next time for another episode. But in the meantime, cheers. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye, everybody.